never made it, but I know what it takes. I'm motivated by a mix of emotion. Got my statement, and I'm reading it slow so I can understand it fully. Appreciate my standing, go out of this world and right on time. Oh, never in my life have I seen the sky light up like this. I'm far away from Earth and I wanna know if you exist. Mission control, do you read me? Send me my coordinates lately. Mission control, am I drifting? Tie me to someone who will love me, yeah. Wait, I think I'll last a bit longer. Find another.
Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd family a part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. Hopefully everybody that has to work today enjoyed your New Year's weekend. And for those of you that are off today, which I know is most people, I hope you continue to enjoy your New Year's weekend and enjoy all the New Year's Day bowl games that are on today, because they're going to play them today instead of yesterday. But the good news is, now that it is January, I can officially start saying that NASCAR starts back next month. And I am looking forward to the 2023 NASCAR Cup Series season. I believe the season starts back the third Sunday in February. It used to be the second Sunday, but I think it's the third Sunday again this year, just like it was last year. So for all you NASCAR fans, you can look forward to that, because before long, we'll be heading into the new NASCAR Cup Series season. And I'm looking forward to see what Kyle Busch will do in his first year driving for Richard Childress Racing. But a few more quick thoughts on the Georgia-Ohio State game that I didn't say in yesterday's video, because I wanted everybody to come back and see if I had more to say. So I'll go ahead and say it now, that we almost had two underdogs playing for the national championship, because everybody had Georgia winning and everybody had Michigan winning. Now, Michigan lost and Georgia came pretty doggone close to losing. So instead of having Georgia and Michigan, we almost had Ohio State and TCU. And I'm glad that TCU won, because me personally, I don't think Michigan has the offense to hang with Georgia, but I think TCU does. So I think it'll be a better game now that it's TCU versus Georgia instead of Michigan versus Georgia. But either way, I think Georgia's going to win. Everybody that watches this channel knows by now that I've said since September the best two teams in the country were Ohio State and Georgia. So had Ohio State won Saturday night, I would pick them to beat TCU next Monday. But since Georgia won, I'll pick Georgia. To me, it was clear since about week 2 of the season, those were the two best teams in the country. It wasn't close. And my pastor told me yesterday morning at church, he said, last year when you said the game of football has changed and you've got to score 40 points now to win, I think you were right. I said, yeah, that's why I said it. I didn't say it to sound crazy. And I didn't say it to take any kind of a shot at teams that focus on defense. But the game of football has just changed so much. And that's why here on the channel you hear me talk about Iowa a lot. Now, I know the style of play that they still play with in 2023, they're never going to win a national championship. But Iowa still focuses on defense. They win 8 or 9 games a year with the most pitiful, dreadful looking offense you've ever seen, because their head coach is old school. They're one of the few programs that still plays offense with a fullback. You don't see fullbacks anymore, but you just cannot win anymore by scoring 14 points. You can't. So anytime anybody comes to me and says, boy, so and so's got a good defense, I always say, who cares? If you can't score 40 points, you're not going to win a national championship. Yeah, you need an average defense. It doesn't need to be terrible, but I don't care if you've got a top 5 defense. The way offenses put up points this day and time, if your offense cannot put up 40 points, you're not winning a national championship. That's just the way that it is. It doesn't mean you've got to score 40 points every single game, but it means when you play the best teams in America, and it's 2 top 5 teams or 2 top 10 teams, you're not winning 12-9. It's just not going to happen. But I thought the Ohio State-Georgia game was really, really, really good. And I thought the TCU-Michigan game was really, really, really good. And I'm glad because, as I said in yesterday's video, since the playoffs started, it seems like every year at least one of the first-round playoff games is a complete, total blowout. And you watch it and you think, man, these are playoff games. These games are supposed to be close. Well, this year we actually got what we wanted. We got 2 good, competitive, close football games. But just like I mentioned in yesterday's video about the Arkansas game being a good reason why people shouldn't bet, those 2 games Saturday night were another good reason why you shouldn't bet. Nobody gave TCU a chance. They won. And nobody gave Ohio State a chance. And they just about pulled it out. I think last check, Georgia was like a 9 or 10 point favorite. And Kirby Smart even said it was the worst they had played all year long. And they played like absolute doo-doo. And that's why you don't bet. Because you go into it expecting one thing, and what you expect to happen doesn't happen. But every team has 1 or 2 games a year where you just do not play good. And Kirby Smart said if Stetson Bennett doesn't play any better next week, they'll lose to TCU. And I know I mentioned in a video last week that TCU's never won a national championship. And just in case anybody knows the history of college football, I know TCU has actually won 2 national championships, but I don't count them. If you do count them, then you can't get mad at Alabama fans when they claim they've won 20-something national titles. Because back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and into the 60s, there wasn't a lot of bowl games. You had 2 or 3 bowl games. So what everybody did was play the regular season, and when the regular season came to an end, voters would sit around and vote on who they thought was the best team in the country. And whichever team got the most votes was determined to be the national champion. So you might have been 6-2. You might have been 6-1-1. You might have been 5-2-1. But if you were voted the best team in America, you won the national championship. I don't count those. To me, if there's not a game to determine the national champion, it doesn't count. But if you want to say TCU has won 2, then you can, but I don't count those because if you do, then when Bama fans claim they've won 20-something, you got to give it to them. You can't give Bama credit for winning all those voted national champions and not give TCU credit for winning those 2 voted national champions. But I don't count those. It was a little bit better in the 80s because we had more bowl games in the 80s, but we still didn't have a national championship game. They would play the 10 or 11 game regular season, and then they would play all the bowl games. And after all the bowl games were played, people still voted on who was the national champion. But generally, it was, the 4 or 5 best teams, and you just took those 4 or 5 best teams and voted on which one of those 5 teams was the best. But you had 18, 19 bowl games. Back in the 30s, you had a 5 or 6 game regular season, and you only had 2 or 3 bowl games. So you've got 75, 80, 85 teams that can win a national championship. So you could write down anybody and they'd get a vote. At least by the 80s, it was pretty much the teams that played in the better of the bowl games, and generally it was the top 5 or 6 teams, and then they look at the final poll and vote on the top 5 or 6, and whichever team gets the most votes wins the national title. But I don't declare somebody a national champion by getting voted on. People just sit around and decide, hey, this team's the best. To me, if there's not a game where a team wins it, it doesn't count. That's just my opinion. But on to today's video. I've already done one of these, and I said when I done the one that I did, I'd have to do at least one more during the off season. And I know it's not the complete off season yet because we still have today's bowl games and then next week's national championship game. But for most teams, it's already the off season. And the reason why I've got to do one more is because the last time I did one of these, there was still a few teams that had not hired their head coach. But I think now, unless we get another one of those shocks in the middle of the offseason where a coach resigns or retires, pretty much every team now has their coach heading into the 2023 college football season. Luke Fickell is the new head coach at Wisconsin. Matt Rule at Nebraska. Jeff Brom at Louisville. Tom Herman, that's right, the former head coach at Texas, is now the head coach of Florida Atlantic. And most people that are insiders of college football, and Texas in particular, say that Tom Herman did not get fired because he didn't perform at Texas. Tom Herman got fired because the boosters didn't like him. And the boosters is where most of these programs get their money from. So if you've got these boosters that pay $8-9 million a year come to you and tell you, hey, if you don't fire that guy, you're not getting my money, most programs have no choice but to fire the guy. Hugh Freeze, the new head coach at Auburn. Then we have Jamie Chadwell at Liberty. Deion Sanders at Colorado. Eric Morris is the new head coach at North Texas. That was one of the schools that did not have a new coach. Last time I did a video about this, their last coach had been fired, but they had not, as of yet, hired a new coach. And then we have Troy Taylor, who took over at Stanford. Of course, David Shaw resigned, claiming he's retiring, and they did not have a coach. Now they do. G.J. Kinney at Texas State. Barry Odom, UNLV. Another school that did not have a coach. Last time we talked about it, Purdue. They hired Ryan Walters. I believe he was the defensive coordinator at Illinois. Kenny Dillingham takes over at Arizona State. Brent Key, Georgia Tech. Of course, he was their interim coach. Scott Satterfield is now the man in charge at Cincinnati. Lance Taylor is the new head coach of the Broncos of Western Michigan. Kevin Wilson is the new coach at Tulsa. Tim Beck, who was the OC at NC State, is the new head coach of Coastal Carolina. Biff Poggi takes over at Charlotte. Trent Dilfer, UAB. Alex Golish at South Florida. And Zach Arnett at Mississippi State. Now, if my math is correct and I didn't leave any schools out, and I don't think I did, there are 22 new FBS head coaches. Now, if you were to ask me which one of these schools I think got the best coach for their school, I would go with the very first name I mentioned, Luke Fickell. I think it's an A+ hire. I expect Wisconsin to be really, really good right away. I don't think he's going to have to go in there and take 2 or 3 years. Don't be surprised if they're a 9 or 10 win team in 2023. And I would say the worst one, in my personal opinion, is probably Trent Dilfer at UAB. That's a move that nobody saw, a move that nobody expected. And I saw a video where Trent Dilfer's trying to show some sideline reporter his Super Bowl ring, and it just, I don't know, it just came across as creepy. It just comes across as a guy that's trying too hard to be cool and trying too hard to be accepted. But maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe that'll be successful. I just don't see it. I also don't think that Tim Beck is going to do a whole lot at Coastal Carolina, but maybe I'll be wrong about that as well. I know Coastal hopes I'm wrong because, they've got a really, really consistent, good football program. They don't want it to fall off now that Jamie Chadwell has left. Any thoughts on any of these coaching hires? Please feel free to let me know. A lot of times, you can't really tell because a lot of times it's a coach's very first coaching job. So really, if you say, hey, they're going to be good or they're going to be bad, it's just your opinion and you have nothing to back it up because they've never coached before. But a lot of times it's coaches that, they came from a certain coach's coaching tree. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Because what works at one program won't work at another program. So if you came from a long time head coach's coaching tree and you've been learning from him, a lot of times if you take what you learn from him to the school you're going to, it won't work. But it's not because you can't coach, it's because you tried to take what you learned under whatever coach you were under to your new program. And every school has different players, and each player at each school has to be coached in a different way. So what you might tell players at this school and it works, you tell players at the next school and it won't work because every single school has different kind of players, and each kind of player has to be taught and has to learn in a different way. So a lot of times, if a coach has been under a certain coach's coaching tree for 8 or 9 years and they get a head coaching job, that's why it doesn't work. It's not because the coach that taught them was no good. It's because he tried to take what he learned and coach the same way at his school, and it just does not work that way. So a lot of times you have to take what you learned and put it in your memory bank, but you can't coach that same way. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. What is a tree's favorite drink? Root beer. And that wraps it up with today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.